Good morning, everyone. Sincerest apologies for the delay this morning. We ran into some technical difficulties. I think some of you might have had issues logging in. That's been cleared up. We're going to start in a couple of seconds, but I am going to take it slow because we have some people who were on the line earlier who will be calling back in. My name is Brian Smith. I'm the Customer Engagement Manager here at Samsara, and I'll be walking you today through a presentation of the Samsara Driver App. I'm really excited to be working with you today. The ELD is fast approaching, and I want to make sure that you have the latest and greatest, best information on what's coming up in terms of utilizing the Driver App, going over basic functionality, and then answering questions. The way that today's session will work, just to set expectations, we've got a lot of people joining the line, which is part of some of the issues we had this morning, but we've got a lot of people calling in. There is a question function that's a part of your webinar. We'll have Jonte Craighead, who's our product manager for compliance, as well as a number of our support engineers working the question queue. And so at any moment, if you have a question based on what's being said during the webinar, please feel free to send that in. They'll answer them as they come in. And then at the end of the session, this will go about 45 minutes or so, we'll kind of round up all the questions that have general applications for most online, and I'll read through those and share them with everybody. If we don't get to your question, we absolutely want to follow up with everyone. So if we don't get to your question, I'll be providing, we'll follow up individually, and we'll have our support resources reach out as well to make sure that we get all the questions answered. Again, really excited to be working with you, and just want to jump into the presentation. So at a high level, what I'd like to go over today is getting ready for the mandate. Jonte will walk us through a couple of steps of what's coming in the next couple of weeks from a product perspective and what you want to do to make sure that you're fully prepared. I'll be covering driver app sign-in so you know how to get your drivers set up. We'll be talking about the DVIR process very briefly. It's a function of the driver app, but it is not part of the mandate. It's just a function of the driver app. We'll then, of course, talk about managing hours of service and how the drivers do their day-to-day and doing manual duty status updates. As part of all of this, I'll also be doing a live demo on my phone so that you can see what it looks like when we do this live. In terms of getting ready, I'm going to let Jonte speak for a couple of seconds and kind of talk about, what we need to do to get ready for the mandate.
Hi there, everyone. My name is Jonte Craighead, and I'm the product manager for compliance. It's great to be talking with so many of you today. I know we have a lot of attendees on the line. It's really important that everybody, especially given how close we are to the mandate, is taking a look at all of their readiness details. We tried to put together a list here of the most important things that you can do to get ready. The first, and some of these are going to seem obvious, but you'd be surprised. The first is to update your DOT number and address information. You can do that directly in our settings. The next is to make sure that all of your drivers have their license state and license number entered into the platform as well. Those are required to be displayed on the ELD in the case of a roadside inspection. There are also in-cab materials that you're required to have, the ELD manual as well as the instruction sheet. Those can be made available electronically, or you can print them out from our website. Make sure that all of your drivers, in addition to having their license state and number, are included in the Samsara platform so that they're ready to go on day one. They can log into the app and update their log as necessary. Finally, make sure that your drivers are comfortable with the application, that they've had a chance to review all the features, that they know what to do in the event of an inspection, as well as common tips and tricks that you'll learn in this presentation that you can share with your team. And of course, connecting to the Wi-Fi hotspot so that you can stay connected to engine data even when you're in areas without great cell coverage is also important. So with these steps, you should be ready to tackle ELD beginning on December 18th. And if you have any questions, please feel free to forward them, as Brian said, into the session. I'll be trying to answer as many of them as I can, and between myself and the support team, we'll also try to follow up and answer any questions offline that we can't get to today. With that, I'm going to turn it back over to Brian so that we can get the show on the road. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Jonte. So if we actually move into the discussion portion, I really just want to go through kind of the basics of the driver app for anyone who hasn't kind of been walked through all the functionality I had in one place. And one thing that I do want to share is that we will be recording this presentation as well as sharing a deck. So anything you might miss in terms of notes or things we mentioned, you will have a copy of this deck to share later with your drivers if they're not able to make this time. So logging into the app is really straightforward. Drivers will be asked to enter a fleet ID, a username, and a password. If they're using, the fleet ID will be saved between every login, and if they're using the same mobile device every day, it'll actually remember the username as well. So really drivers will only need to remember their password on a day-to-day basis if they're using the same mobile device. It's also important if you're still setting up your drivers to keep your login simple. You'll notice when I go to the demo, I only have 3 characters for my password. I keep it very straightforward. We have some text down here at the bottom that reminds you of this, but drivers do not have the ability to reset their passwords from the driver app. It's something that an administrator on the dashboard would handle for them, and so it definitely keeps overhead down. If you have a simple password that's easy for them to remember, an employee ID, some portion of their name or a phone number they have on file, those are all really helpful things that you can use to keep it easy for drivers to remember that information on a day-to-day basis. Once the driver is logged in, they will be asked to certify any previously uncertified logs. In the most recent update, the system only goes back 8 days. And so any of those 8 days that are uncertified, they'll get a pop-up as soon as they log in, reminding them to certify those days. They can hit that review and certify, and with that pop-up, they can look at all of the drive and on-duty time that pops up and sign up on that all at once. It's a really helpful way, especially for scenarios where maybe a driver has been off for the weekend or for 2 days or more, and when they come back, they just need to review and look to see that they were off duty for that time frame in the system, and they can certify that all at once. After they certify or skip, they'll be asked to select a vehicle. I have one vehicle here in my fleet, but for the drivers in a lot of your fleets, they'll see every vehicle available to them. The easiest way to get to the vehicle that you want for the trip that you're planning today or the routes that you're running today is to just use the search feature. It's a very quick way to go through the entire fleet and just get the vehicle that you want to be in for that day or for that session. Before we jump into DVIRs, one thing I do want to call out is the vehicle button down here at the bottom. So there will be cases in the learning process where the driver gets in the wrong vehicle, or there will also be scenarios where throughout the course of the day, a driver needs to change vehicles. They start the morning in one vehicle, they end in another. The vehicle button doesn't get its own slide in this presentation, but is a really easy way for you to change your vehicle assignment throughout the day without actually having to log out, log back in. None of that's necessary. You can just change your vehicle from the vehicle assignment. If we move on to the DVIR portion, when you click the DVIR button, you'll be asked to enter a new report. When you enter a new report, the vehicle will be pulled over automatically, and you can select between pre and post-trip. By default, you have optional photos that you can take, but this can be made mandatory in the back end of the dashboard. But you can take photos like you would on any smartphone. And then as part of the inspection, you can highlight any defects that are observed during the inspection. This checklist on the right shows what happens when you click that Add Remove Defect button. It'll pop up, give you a list of defects, and for anyone that applies, the driver can select that defect, they can take pictures just like they did for the walk-around, and they can add in comments. This can be really helpful because part of what the system allows is alerts can be set up by managers on the dashboard to notify maintenance, fleet, a third party, whoever you want, that an unsafe DVIR has come in. And so it's a very easy way to close that process out. As soon as an issue is identified in the DVIR process, an email or an SMS text can be sent to the right people to know how to follow up best on that DVIR. And I'll show what that looks like a little bit later in today's session. To finish out the DVIR process, drivers will, when they find defects, either if they do or if there are no defects at all, either way they'll be asked to certify as safe or as needing attention. They will certify and save that, and in the event that it's unsafe, it lists as unsafe in the DVIR section. Every DVIR that will be entered on this vehicle lives in this portion of the driver app. So every driver who gets in after this review will see that the vehicle is unsafe. And once it's been resolved, this unsafe will go to resolved and then ultimately safe. And again, subsequent drivers will be able to see the history. And so it's one place where drivers can go, start off their day, and see all the previous history of DVIRs in that vehicle. And I'll show you what it looks like to click into each one, but as you review each one, you can actually see who entered the DVIR, what issues they observed, once maintenance is followed up, what issues they resolved, how they resolved them. All those notes carry over to the driver app, so it's one place where they can go to manage all of that. And as I mentioned earlier, all of the information here in the driver mobile app carries over to the dashboard. Now what I really want to dig into for today's presentation is hours of service and setting up the duty status. So for hours of service, drivers will click into the hours of service button in the top left, and they'll be given this dashboard that'll show them all the information they need to manage their hours. It's really important to stress that on this page, nothing here is intended to be shared with an inspector. Everything here is specific to the driver's management of their hours. We'll cover the inspection later in the presentation, but everything required for the inspection happens behind the DOT inspection button. So it's a really important distinction. As I go through this page and kind of talk through the different segments, at the very top, in this gray bar, current status off duty, this is where a driver would go to manually change their duty status to off duty, some other, maybe sleeper berth, whatever it ends up being, they can change their duty status manually from that button. Here, these three rings are how drivers manage their hours within their given rule set. So you have the time available to break, their total shift time, total cycle time, and all of that will tick down throughout the day so the driver can manage those hours. When the numbers get close to 0, the icons will turn yellow as a warning, and then they'll turn red when they actually hit 0 and go into violation. But that's how drivers can manage that. And there's a view that you have as a manager on your own end of the dashboard that behaves in a similar fashion. If we kind of move on to the rest of the page here, drivers can see their logs either by clicking the log button here, which will bring them to the current day, or they can go to any specific day and review the log for that day. For the red pencils, in this case, that means that the log is uncertified, and that makes sense for the current day. It's not yet completed. All of these green check marks, these are scenarios where the log has been certified for that day. The transfer logs button here, this allows drivers to email their logs, but this functionality is also behind the DOT inspection button, so I'll show what that looks like in a couple of slides. But this is one of the ways that you can email transfer your logs. And if I just show you kind of in a graphical format what it looks like to manually change your duty status, drivers will go in, click the gray button, they'll be given the duty status that's available to them per their account, and they'll click save. And it's as simple as that. One thing that I do want to call out, and I think some may know on the line, but I want to make sure I make it explicit, is the automatic duty status behind driving. So the mandate is very specific on the fact that when the vehicle moves above 5 miles an hour, the driver must be moved into the driving status. And so once a driver is assigned to a vehicle and starts driving, we move them into driving status. And that's specifically per the mandate. At the same time, when the vehicle stops, the system will stop to ask, still driving, because the system's noticed that the vehicle has stopped. The driver can then, from this page, select that they are still driving, they can say that they're off duty, or they can say that they're on duty. In the event that a driver misses this pop-up entirely, they will automatically be put into on duty. So that's how the system can work on behalf of the driver and making sure that if we know that the vehicle is not in motion, we shouldn't leave the duty status as driving. And then obviously in terms of brakes, drivers can manually go off duty if they've missed this pop-up. They can make those changes on their own from the manual perspective. Certifying logs. And so certifying logs and a couple other functions we'll talk about in a little bit is also behind the logs page. So once you click into logs, either from the log button or from an individual day, the driver can hit the big green certify button, and then the required text that comes from the mandate is, I hereby certify that my data entries and my record of duty status for this 24-hour period are true and correct. The driver will select agree, and that will certify the log for that day. So I was going through a high-level day in the life of navigating the system, starting with login, DVIRs, managing your duty. At the end of the day, the driver will sign out. And this is something that I like to spend a lot of time talking about. I'll be quick about it, but it's really important that I stress it. Drivers need to sign out of the app entirely at the end of their shift. Because the mandate requires that all driving time push the driver into driving above 5 miles an hour. If the driver happens to turn the phone off at the end of the shift, or perhaps swipe the app closed, that's not the same as signing out of the app entirely. And so what will happen is, if fleet moves the vehicle at the end of the day, if another driver does a run in that vehicle, the system still thinks the first driver is still driving, and so that drive time will show up on their logs. I'll walk you through how this can be edited, but it's something that as we learn, or as your driver's learning it up to speed, you'll just want to move them through that. You won't want to have to kind of do the edits, make the changes. It's something to get ahead of. So when you're doing your training, when you're talking to drivers, it's just one way to very easily keep those logs clear. So again, it's not the same thing as maybe swiping the app closed like you would a lot of apps. Drivers absolutely need to sign out at the end of the day, and that's the surest way to make sure that their logs stay clean and that whoever's driving that vehicle gets that drive time exclusively on their logs. As I talk through some other functions and features that are available, as I mentioned, drivers have the ability to edit their logs. So in terms of editing logs, drivers can go to the log page the same way they did when they certified. And then from this page, they can click into the graph. And by clicking into the graph, you get this pop-up that allows you to pick a start time for your edit, an end time for your edit, and the applicable duty status. And you get the same page you did when we picked manual duty status. The only difference here is if, as a driver, you go to simply save, you will be asked to also add a remark. The mandate requires a remark go with this edit. And so once a remark is added, the driver will be allowed to save that edit. And that edit will also come through in the dashboard where you, as the manager, can see that edit. Carrier edits. So this part is going to be a change for a lot of people on the line. It's part of the mandate. And if I step back for a second, this feature and all the features that I show you in the demo will be coming out tomorrow and will be available to you. But this part of the mandate is something that I want to make sure I spend some time talking through so that everyone's comfortable with it. Again, we have questions being taken. But the mandate requires that all certified logs, or all certification of logs, be owned by the driver. And so from the dashboard, as a carrier, when a log has been certified, you are able to recommend edits to that log, but ultimately the driver must sign off on that edit. And so what will happen is, within the dashboard, you have a similar page for viewing logs that the driver has. You can pick a start time, you can pick an end time, and you can pick a new duty status. But when you click save, what will happen in your dashboard is you will see an acknowledgement of that save, but the graph itself won't change. And what will show up is this button that shows pending edits. And this will show, and as you click the pending edits button, it'll toggle between what's been certified by the driver and the change that you were intending to make. That change will only go through once the driver has approved that edit. So the way that works is nothing interrupts the driver's day currently. You will hit save, the pending edit will show up on your page, but what will happen is when the driver goes to sign out at the end of their day, they will get this pop-up. And it will say, you have pending carrier edits that need your approval. This is where the driver can go in and review the carrier edits, and based on their review of the edits, they can approve or deny those edits. And I say it in both ways because it's very important that you and the drivers are in lockstep on the edits that you're making. Because if you're making a change that you want them to approve, you want to make sure that they approve it because you agree upon it, and if they're going to deny on it, that they follow. If they're going to deny it, they follow up with you and tell you why they denied it, so that you can be on the same page about what the edit should be. But that's the functionality that's required. They have to be the final ones to sign off on that edit, and so as the manager on the carrier dashboard side, you're not able to go in and simply make the change. The driver has to acknowledge and approve that change. So that's a key distinction that I want to talk through. DOT inspection. So I mentioned a bit earlier in the presentation that everything that a driver needs for the inspection is behind the DOT inspection button. So from this page, DOT inspection pulls up the log page here where the driver has a couple of options. They can go to transfer logs. And so in terms of transfer logs, if during an inspection the inspector requests a transfer of the logs of the data file, there are two options that we make available within the transfer logs button. Drivers can do an email address, And when they select email, it'll actually go directly to FMCSA. It's already set up. And the same thing with wireless web services. They select wireless web services, that will directly go to the FMCSA and their wireless web services location. In both cases, it's a simple one-button press for the driver to transfer those logs to a centralized location that the FMCSA and DOT can follow up on a later basis. If we move through the page, it has all the basic required information that Jonte mentioned earlier. It has who the driver is. You notice I have my driver's license, or the driver's license I've pasted here, as well as state of origin. That'll be required, so making sure your drivers are up to date in the system is important. It also carries the DOT information, so your DOT number, carrier name, main office. That's all important because when you put it in the back end of the system on the dashboard, here's where it shows up on the log for the driver. And then the rest of the form contains the duty statuses, the charts where applicable, the unassigned hours. All of that appears farther down on the chart here. So it's everything that shows up on the log for the DOT inspection page. The other part that I want to talk through is some of the in-cab material that you need to have available in terms of an inspection. So our reps have been reaching out to you as our customers to make sure that you have your DOT inspection kits, your ELD solution manuals. The mandate requires that there be a manual describing the ELD functionality. So it covers very much what we're doing in today's presentation, what it means to log in, how you perform edits, make changes. That will need to be in cab in the event of an inspection. At the same time, we'll be sending over a DOT card that will have all the basics to explain how to read the card. And so those are two things that we provide to you free of charge that you can work with your account rep to make sure you have if they haven't been sent to you already. The last part of in-cab material that I want to talk about is the spare paper logs. So the mandate also requires that spare logs be on hand in the event of inspection. The largest driver for this are for the scenarios where paper logs are accessible, exception cases. One that we'll get to in a little bit is in the event that the ELD malfunctions. So if the ELD goes down for some reason, there is an exemption of 8 days where the driver is allowed to put their logs on paper. In those cases, it'll be important to have those logs on hand. So part of the inspection process is to just have them available. And the most straightforward way is to keep the logbooks, the paper logbooks that you may already have on hand. And it's a minimum of 8 days. You don't need just 8 days. There are two optional duty statuses that we allow within the system that are configurable by driver. So this is something that you can set up in the back end. If you reach to our support team, they can help you with this. But personal conveyance and yard move are duty statuses that are optional for every driver. They're just managed within the driver section of settings within your dashboard. Yard move would be scenarios where your drivers are driving on your own personal property. They're on private property, they're not hauling, they're not on public roads. They're simply repositioning vehicles on your property. Drivers can select the yard move duty status, and that allows them to drive, but with the status of on duty, not driving. This is really a case-by-case basis, and as managers, as owners, it's really your best judgment about who needs to have this duty status, but it is something that can be configured within your dashboard, and if there are questions, we can obviously help set that up. The other one is personal conveyance. So personal conveyance would be scenarios where if you have drivers who are driving vehicles that have gateways, but they do drive for personal time, maybe they're driving on break, they're done for the day, whatever it may be, they have drive times where they shouldn't be considered on duty and they shouldn't be considered driving for work. The personal conveyance duty status is configured in the same way as yard move and allows for drivers to operate the vehicle in the duty status of off-duty, not driving. So those are two optional duty statuses that are available that I wanted to make sure everyone was aware of and exist within the system. Diagnostic and malfunction alerts. So I talked about this a little bit earlier, but for the 8 days of paper logs that are on hand, these are the diagnostic and malfunction alerts that show up within the system if there's an issue with our ability to collect data. And so the mandate is very specific that all ELDs need to be able to self-report on their level of compliance. So in the event that an ELD is not compliant, ours in particular is not getting the correct data, you will see these icons as the driver. We are here to work with you in these issues. So in the event that a driver reports they've seen this, we highly encourage you to reach out to our support team. We'll help you redo the install, we'll help you troubleshoot, we'll help sign new hardware. We are committed to keeping you compliant and keeping you on the road. And so whatever we can do to make sure that you're up and running, we will be there for you. We're very aware of the 8-day minimum that you have, or maximum that you have to complete that work. So we will be there to help you get up and going as soon as possible. The last part that I want to go through before we jump in is just basic internet connectivity. So in terms of how we handle low connectivity times, there will be scenarios where either the tablet can't reach cell service or the driver is out of range and can't reach cell service. And I just want to comment on the fact, or just talk through how the system works. So in both those scenarios, the gateway is still connected to the diagnostic port. So we're still able to accurately collect runtime. At the same time, the driver is still able to operate the mobile device. So they're still able to go in, change their duty statuses, make edits. All of that can happen and be saved on the phone. And so what happens is when they actually come into cell coverage, when they come back out of whatever spot they were where they didn't have coverage, that data will sync in the cloud. And that's something that our support team manages through the audit report, HOS audit report, and something we can walk through, at a later date on an individual basis if there's more information or more asks on that. But ultimately, that's how the information stays current. This also means, though, that there's one scenario that I want to correct from earlier in the presentation. I mentioned earlier that it's really important that drivers sign out of the system entirely at the end of their shift. If the driver does not have internet connectivity, does not have cell coverage or Wi-Fi coverage, they will get a pop-up that lets them know that they should stay logged into the mobile device. This is important because if they log out and we don't have cell coverage, we can't record that log out. And so we're not able to properly rebuild those logs if the driver signs out, especially if someone else gets in that vehicle and we don't know that they've intended to sign out because they don't have cell coverage. At the same time, if a driver's in a remote area and signs out, there's no guarantee that they can sign back in from that remote area. We won't be able to authenticate their username password combination without cell coverage, and so they won't be able to log back into their account and start up their day. So this is the one scenario where if at the end of the day, especially if the driver is the last one driving that vehicle in a remote location and the first one in the morning, we recommend that they stay logged into the vehicle because they're sure no one else will drive the vehicle, and then when they start up in the day, it'll be okay that that drive time appears on their logs. But that's the one scenario. So I wanted to walk through that to make sure that it was clear to everyone. So hours of service are managed from the reports page. Hours of service, and you can see a couple of drivers that I have set up. And then over here on the right, you see my phone. I have my fleet ID entered, I have my driver username entered, and I'm going to enter in a simple to remember password. And you can see from this screen, the first thing I get is my number of uncertified logs. So this driver has 6 uncertified logs. I only have one vehicle right here, but again, I could search for all the vehicles in my fleet, whatever was the fastest way to get the vehicle that I want. I pick my vehicle, and I land on the dashboard that I showed earlier. We have my fleet name up top, and you can see the vehicle username, you can see the driver username as well as the vehicle that I'm in. So you can tell that I'm logged in as JSmith. If I go into the DVIR process, you can see every DVIR that I've already entered in the system, and you can see that some of them have been resolved, you can see why they're marked as safe. But if we dig into any of these, you can see the actual history. So you can see the open defect, I logged an air compressor, air conditioner issue. You can see when I logged it, and then as a mechanic goes in to implement it and a new driver goes in to sign off on it, that would update this list and you'd see the full report on here. So this is how drivers can see all the previous work that's happened on their vehicle. Assuming this was safe, just for the purpose of the demo, I would go in and do a new pre-trip report. So I can go in, I can start, and you'll notice that as soon as I go to start my DVIR, I'm asked to go on duty. So I'll switch on duty, and then I'll go to add my report again. It'll ask me for tractor only or tractor and trailer. I'll hit tractor only in this case. And then this screen should be very familiar. It's exactly what I showed you during the presentation. I'll pick pre-trip. I can go and add and remove defects. And this is the full list of defects available currently within the system. You'll see that at the very bottom, I can select other. And so if nothing applies, I can put in my freeform text, other defect. And as I mentioned, you can also take photos. So just to show you what that looks like, if I click in on the photo icon, I can take a photo like I would on any other smartphone, or if I had a bunch of photos stored up, maybe they were somewhere else on my phone, I could pull them from my library. And then after my review, I would hit next, and I would mark the vehicle as safe or unsafe. And it's really important here that you see that the system already knows that there are previous defects entered. So if I were to go in right now as a driver during my pre-trip and say that the vehicle was safe, I'd be approving defects that I know already exist within the system. And so this is a way in which drivers can always see the history of that vehicle and know that it's been marked unsafe. And then if they're making a change, it's really easy to see the previous work and not miss something that another driver might have noticed that might be missed on the follow-up inspection. I'm going to back out in this case, but that's how a driver would manage a DVIR in the event that they were the first ones in and looking for their own defects. The second part that I want to show is hours of service. So hours of service, you can see I'm already on duty in the system because I started the DVIR process. And for those of you who are watching the dashboard, you can also see that over here on the dashboard, I'm on duty as Jeff Smith. I have my available break time, shift time, and cycle time. And as I navigate down, it's just like I showed in the presentation. So you have the different hours available. All of these are still red because I haven't certified those. But if I go into Wednesday, for instance, I can navigate to Wednesday. I was off duty for all of Wednesday. I can go in and I can shipping ID. I can type in text for shipping ID. I can update text for trailer number. I don't get clicked into it. There we go. Shipping ID. I can click in here for trailer. And I can also go in and make any edits. So if I want to add a segment where I say maybe from 3 a.m. to 6 a.m. 6 a.m. I'm on duty. I can make that segment. I can select on duty. And again, if I just go to save, I'll have to be asked to describe the reason. I can't just make the edit to that day. So I'll just say on duty on Wednesday, and I'll save. Now that edit goes in place. I can certify that. I get the required text, and now you can see that I've certified this log. It saved the shipping and trailer text that I put in this case. It shows my name as the signature, and so I can tell from here that I've certified that log. I can go backwards, and then now I have the green check mark, so I know that this has been certified for that day. And then on the dashboard, the driver won't have access to this portion, but I can go in as a manager. I can go in and I can see that time frame. And you can see the remark that I added on duty on Wednesday as part of my edit. So that's how that carries over. In the event of an inspection again, from here, you know who I am as the driver, you have my DOT information. The information here isn't being pulled from a vehicle, so there's not everything available in terms of drive time, unassigned hours, but it has the basics of what you would see during an inspection as a driver, and I encourage you to take a look if you haven't already on your own system. I can navigate back through previous days. If I go back to Wednesday, you can see that mark that I edited in there, and you can see my driver here, my driver's signature, because you can see I signed off on Wednesday. And then if we go to transfer logs, if I want to transfer that data file as a driver, I have the option of email, which now is just adding in a comment, and it's a direct email to DOT. So for those of you who might have used the system in the past and see the freeform email text, it's now just adding in comments and directly sending. And the same thing works for the wireless web services. So I can get wireless web services, I can just put in comments, and it's a direct send. And so the data file send is actually really simple and really one button press. The last part that I really want to talk about before we kind of look to some more of the available questions that we'll have towards the end is the portion we talked about a bit earlier, the driver approval of carrier edits. So again, as I mentioned, on your end, as a manager, as a supervisor, if you need to make an edit to a certified log, we can use the one that I just set up now. So Jeff Smith just certified this log a couple of minutes ago. If I want to go in and edit that, maybe I want to add 2 more hours for this example. So I'll go in, I'll add 2 more hours, 6 a.m. to 8 a.m. And we'll say on duty. And we can say 2 extra hours. When I go to save that, you'll see that the save went through. So I have HOS log saved, but the chart hasn't changed. There's no update to the chart. But this button that wasn't here before is the show pending edits. So from show pending edits, you can see it now toggles between what has been certified by the driver and the pending edit that you want to make as a manager. And so that's how it exists for you, and that's where that will sit. Again, on the driver end, if we go in, the driver's not getting any notifications during the day. Nothing stops them from completing their work. But at the end of the day, when the driver goes to sign out, it will show that they have to review carrier edits. So again, the review that you'll see on my phone will be different than what will happen with live data, but they'll get a file that has the logs for the vehicle in, the duty status, the duration, and overall what this is saying is the shift time for that day is changing from 3 to 5. You're adding 2 more hours for those hours I added earlier. I will sign off on that as a driver. I'll do a quick refresh. And if I go back to Wednesday, you can already see the 5 over in shift time. It's now from 3 to 8 instead of from 3 to 6. So then as a driver, and the pending edits button is also missing. So as a driver, then I sign out. I could go back and review these certified logs, but I won't in this case. And I will sign out anyway. And I sign out of the system entirely, and I'm back on the introduction screen. If I go back to all drivers, you can now see that Jeff Smith is also signed out, and he has been for this 1 minute. So that's everything that I wanted to cover for you guys today in review of the Driver app. I'm going to look over at our support team and see what kind of questions we have coming in, and if we have some that kind of generally cover the group here and I think are good for general consumption, I'll share those. Otherwise, we'll close out early. But just give me 1 second, and I'll go write up some questions.